Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. We got three guys here today. Our friend Neil is with his son in Scotland, and he'll be back next week. Hey, Greg. Hey, John. How you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing great. A lot of interesting things happening this week in the world of AI. Why don't we dig in? We've got a lot to talk about. Greg, why don't we lead off with the story around Ben Evans talking about how LLMs haven't found a product market fit. I thought that was a really interesting topic. You wanna crack that one open for us?
Sure. Ben Evans is a sort of former VC. He's an analyst turned VC. He's a very smart guy. He's been around for a long time and has a kind of broad historical perspective on technology. And he's a little bit of a contrarian. He's written this article which says that basically, in a nutshell, LLMs, generative AI, hasn't really found its market fit. It's a technology, not a product, and it's going to take a while for things to kind of shake out and for really solid use cases and products to emerge. And he cites the example of the internet itself. It took years to kind of gel and for all the infrastructure to be in place. He talks about the iPod and the iPhone, which took a while to reach a kind of critical mass. And so he's saying the same thing probably applies here, that it's going to be longer than we anticipate before generative AI and LLMs really find their product market fit. And it won't be a single one, obviously. It'll be many. So it's a kind of a skeptical take on the boosterism that certainly I'm guilty of, and we all are guilty of in fact. But it's interesting because that seems to be generally true of all technology. They appear, people get very excited, and then it kind of takes longer than you think to establish or to really gain traction. But then in retrospect, obviously, things look very different once they do hit some sort of mainstream adoption.
This seems to map with the Gartner hype cycle, that graph where, you've got this like really peak of inflated expectations that happens, and then technology doesn't live up to those expectations for a while. So then they call it the trough of disillusionment. When things just sort of like don't live up to the expectations and people say, oh, it didn't work out. This is sort of what happened with the internet bubble in 2000, right? Infrastructure starts building, business cases start building up, and then you get into this productivity phase. What do you guys think about that?
I think that sounds exactly right, or the right framing here, right? So I think that if, as we know is the case, AI is emerging and changing more rapidly than any other technology before it, especially including the internet. Why not go through the Gartner hype cycle at light speed as well?
At an accelerated pace, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Like normally it would take a while for us to get into that trough of disillusionment or valley of despair. I think I've heard it called as well. But why not have that happen, wherever we are 14 or so months in?
19 months.
Plausible.
19 months.
19. Oh gosh, that yeah, that's a lot longer. This
already.
Yeah. The other thing that kind of strikes me about this is maybe it doesn't have 100% adoption across every person who could possibly adopt it, and maybe this is just semantics. But I would argue, product market fit, at least by one definition, is how disappointed would people be if this thing went away? And okay, so I think he made the case that there are many, many people who try it and then don't come back. Okay, but fair enough. That happens with most products in the beginning. I would be unbelievably disappointed if this thing went away at this point. So, like, if I cast my vote on the product market fit survey, I would be unhappy to the tune of, I'm guessing, several $100s a month. That I would be willing to pay to hold on to this if that was the only option for me. And maybe more if I really thought about the calculation. So I'm not sure, maybe that's just semantics, but I would say that there are pockets where the product market fit for this product, for LLMs in particular, is insanely strong.
I'm with you in terms of disappointment or unhappiness if the product were to go away. I use a bunch of different things, but ChatGPT is the primary thing that I'm using. And in most cases, it exceeds my expectations in terms of what I'm able to do and how it accelerates certain kinds of things that I'm doing. So I'm very happy with it. I mean, is it perfect? No, but it's just really been quite a productivity enhancement for me. So by that definition, I'm right with you. I mean, I think what he's talking about are very specific kinds of sort of business use cases. I mean, maybe he's talking about consumers too, but he's talking about specific use cases, I think, that haven't really gelled kind of in a structured way. Like we can point to this, this is what it's really good for. This is what it's really good for. This is what it's really good for. And we'll talk a little bit about later on about search and the idea that ChatGPT may eventually build a search engine. But let's talk about the Thrive Health kind of item, because Arianna Huffington has got a new startup called Thrive Health, I guess. And then Sam Altman is backing it. And the idea is that you're going to improve, it's going to build a bunch of services that are directed toward using AI to help people get healthier and have better health outcomes, which is a noble objective, certainly. But the writer in The Atlantic who reported the story is very skeptical, thinking, well, the benefits are going to be marginal and there's going to be a lot of privacy problems, with people's particular data. Right. So that's an example of a very specific applied use case that seems quite promising, but, there's a lot of skepticism, at least in that article.
They're definitely going to have to address the HIPAA compliance issues with that, which I'm sure they will, right? I mean, they just raised a bunch of money. They're going to probably lead with that in the same way that Apple leads with privacy, right? So that's going to be first and foremost so that they can dispel any kind of concerns about your privacy data. But my guess is this is like another point solution, going back to our previous point about what are the use cases and where is the product market fit? And, if you stand back a little bit and you think about it, there's a natural evolutionary cycle that happens where there's a foundation, there's a platform technology like AI or the internet that first becomes adopted. And then you need to build solutions on top of it. So this is one of many, many, many solutions that are being built on top of the platform. But if you look at this from a business standpoint, just going back to the previous discussion for a second, is that there are lots of point solutions that in the common thread with a lot of these is automation, is this confluence of convenience, speed to getting answers of what you're curious about, i.e. search, and also the generative aspect of this, which is a completely new paradigm I think people are just not used to. But in the end, you have a point solution like this that's going to leverage the technology to be able to give people a better customer experience, more insight into their health, which if you look at our healthcare as it is today, it's very reactive. So there's not much preventative healthcare going on. And you have to be your own advocate in this kind of ecosystem to really do something about that preventative healthcare. So for me, I love this idea of being able to get control of my health records, for one, knowing what that actually means and being able to match up whether it's my gut health, my physical health, my whatever different, my cholesterol and so forth, and taking all the panel data that I get in my annual checkups and mapping that against some AI that can tell me things I can do to optimize my health. I think that's a very compelling, kind of argument. So I'm looking forward to learning more about what they're going to do, and hopefully they're going in that direction.
I think we may be looking at AI adoption and sort of where does this product market fit the killer product the wrong way. There are going to be very few companies, at least in the short term, aside from the big LLM, chatbots, where it's the AI itself that's driving the whole, business story. This seems at this stage to be more like a personal productivity tool than it does to be an enterprise product enabler, right? So it sort of makes everything that everybody is doing, all the little worker bees at the enterprise actually doing, or at least having the capability to do more, to do it faster, to do it more effectively. I was just talking to somebody earlier today about this idea that, really we probably just quietly 10x'd the number of workers that can do semi-technical things or technical things now over where we were 18 months ago, with tools like make.com and with the code writing capabilities of ChatGPT and these other tools. So like, where does that show up in the way that people are thinking about this? Sure, there's no sort of product market fit at the, this killer enterprise product that's come out that's LLM powered, But, this productivity lift, that's the place that I think may be really interesting.
I would make two comments. In terms of Thrive Health, there's the Aura Ring, which is enormously popular, the Apple Watch, which people buy for health, monitoring. And so I think there's lots of evidence of demand for what you're saying, Andy. And I think there is I get an annual blood test results that has all the technical terminology, and I have to go back to the doctor and say, what the hell does this mean? It does show me the normal ranges, so I can kind of get a sense of whether I'm okay or not okay. Having some insight into that and being able to understand what I can do to improve would be really welcome. I think there's demand that, pent up demand or actual demand evidenced by these other things. And I think consumers would be willing to pay a subscription fee for that, right? And you pay it for the Aura Ring, you pay it for, there's all kinds of subscription related health services.
The biggest impediment to this on the healthcare side is going to be the compliance, especially the hand wringing around, well, we can't have technology or AI practicing medicine. Like that little sort of, asterisk in everything has been so disruptive to so many businesses already, and going to be super disruptive to Thrive. This is why 23andMe had to strip down their genetics reports in the early days and remove everything that was actually useful around predicting, whether I was going to have had an increased risk of some sort of a disease. Was because it was sort of tantamount to practicing medicine to include that stuff, and that we poor consumers couldn't possibly take that information and ingest it without the help of somebody in a white coat.
Is that a state regulation or a state level regulation?
I think that it is primarily state medical boards that drive that.
Are protecting the income of doctors,
I suppose. And look, some of that is for good reason. I mean, some of that is to stop quackery and other forms of taking advantage of people.
But it doesn't stop quackery.
It doesn't stop quackery, and it does stop some legitimate stuff here.
Regulation is useful to protect the public, but often there's another side to it, which is to protect the in group from too many economic threats from an out group or from insurgents or something. That's a completely different conversation. I think you're totally right that compliance is going to be a big challenge for this. I agree.
And the level of compliance is really interesting, right? Because when you look at Ancestry.com and people who took blood tests and, all the stuff to track their ancestry across their platform, BlackRock bought the company back in 2020 for $4 billion, and now BlackRock owns all that data. And BlackRock owns everything else. So, they own Kraft and, other food companies too. And so at what point are we regulating? Are we regulating on the front end how a company like Thrive needs to collect that data, or that BlackRock can't buy Thrive in 5 years?
Well, I think there's an in between, which is who gets to see that data, right? Is that data sold? Is that data transferred? Putting aside hacking for a minute, because everything gets hacked, right? 23andMe was massively hacked. And so we got to assume everything is going to be hacked. That data is very lucrative. You can take a lot of genetic data and do predictive things with it, right? I mean, you could sell that to an insurance company, actuarial, things like life insurance or whatever. I mean, this is what was happening with car tracking, right? So you've got all these sensors in cars and internet connected cars. And what was happening was companies like GM and Ford were selling that data to insurance companies, either directly or indirectly, and making money off of it. It became an income stream for them. And what the insurance companies were doing is they were turning around and saying, "Hey, John, we see that you were driving recklessly on July 17 in Billings, Montana. Your insurance rates are going up." Right. And this was happening actually to people. Their individual data were being used to set insurance rates based on driving records unbeknownst to them. They opted in some sort of, fine print sort of way. Right. So this is the challenge of all of these kinds of things, is what does the consumer understand about what's happening with their data, and what are the controls about how the data can be used?
Yeah. I mean, I suspect what it will happen that has already kind of been unfolding in the healthcare space. I can say from personal experience that ChatGPT actually has pretty good answers on the medical front. And if I want to ask about this little bump I've got on my elbow, I get something a little bit better than the WebMD results that I used to get. I think that Thrive will be precluded from even providing that level of insight back just based on sort of, regulations. And so when you're so in a box and constrained that way, as has happened with a lot of these other companies, what you can actually provide is pretty, lightweight and pretty, in some cases, useless. I mean, even Apple has had to fight around some of the heart rate data and its ability to detect, cardiac arrhythmias. I mean, that required the lobbying effort of one of the, top 3 biggest companies in the world over however many year period it did to make sure that they actually could alert somebody if they're having a heart attack. That seems like a pretty straightforward thing that they might be allowed to do.
The second point is that I already see a bunch of use cases that are pretty compelling on the product market fit, in different sort of software SaaS tools where people are integrating AI and doing very specific things. Composer is one example of that. And there are plenty of others which we could go on at length where something is made simple or more complete, or new things can be done now with data that couldn't be done before. So I think there's a lot of stuff at the point solution level where there is a pretty compelling product market fit. So that's the other thing I wanted to say.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Last point on this Thrive medical company is it reminds me a little bit of how One Medical grew as a company and disrupted the primary care physician space a little bit, where you could have access to your medical records in a way that you didn't before, that you had interoperability. So if you're traveling and you need to see a doctor, you could see a doctor locally. My guess is that they're going to do this hybrid kind of an approach, or maybe embrace telemedicine. So there will be physicians that will be part of the customer experience with this.
A disrupt from within kind of model.
I think so. I think that's where they're heading. Well, let's move on to our next topic here. There was a interesting article in TechCrunch talking about a new Senate bill seeking to protect artists and journalists in their content from AI use.
Yeah, I haven't read the bill, but I just read the coverage. And basically what it says is that it sort of boils down to giving content owners and creatives the ability to have their work so nobody can use their work without permission, right? It's a consent. It's focused on consent. So, you would have to get an opt-in consent from the particular content creator or source before it could be used as training data, as opposed to the sort of pseudo opt-out model that we have right now, because it's not entirely clear. I mean, you can have robots.txt, but it's not entirely clear how you opt out of scraping all your content. And as we discussed in a previous episode, AI CEO from Microsoft, Suleiman, said basically, if it's online, we can use it as training data. That's the social contract that everybody embraces. This may be sort of too little, too late, or symbolic, more than practical. And who knows if it'll actually pass, because a lot of well-intentioned legislation just never goes through.
I mean, it sort of reminds me of getting insurance after a tornado or an earthquake hit your house. I mean,
next time.
Next time. Already happened.
I'm a little bit doubtful about how this is all going to work. This is, coming from the same august body that described the internet as a system of tubes, 20 years ago. So
that was one dude. In fairness,
it was one dude. I know, but it's and look, this is also just what happens, right? So lawmakers take some time to catch up to what's happening, and again, with the pace of this being what it is, boy, they have a lot of catching up to do, and it may take a bunch of years before there's real conversation of an intelligent kind in the Senate and the House around this kind of stuff. I mean, I also, and again, I haven't read the bill either, so probably should before commenting too deeply. But I do have questions about what would it even mean to give permission or withdraw permission.
Well, what would be the mechanism for doing that?
What would be the mechanism? Right. So especially for some of these LLMs, or we've used Suno as an example on the music side. The training data going into LLMs, or these big generative AI models, they're essentially using averages to generate results. And what would it mean to say, I don't want my piece of work to be part of the average, when there are billions of data points sort of going in there? And on one side of things, like, okay, so I take my piece out of there. Well, that changes the average by nothing. Like it doesn't matter. It's ineffectual. On the other hand, how would somebody even know that my piece was in there? Now, it's a little different with the perplexities and with some of the web scraping stuff, where you can where they're actually taking a document and summarizing it. Like that's a slightly different case. But in terms of building the core LLM or generative AI models, that's going to be an incredibly hard thing to police.
Watermarking is one way to do it. I mean, in a sort of a celebrated case that I don't know where it is in the courts, whether it was dismissed or still working its way through, Stable Diffusion or OpenAI, one of them got sued because there were a whole bunch of Getty, little Getty Images banners in there. And so they were generating images that had this distorted Getty Images thing in there so they could look at that and say, well, it's obvious what's going on here, but that's a pretty rare case. So that's an example of, sort of a smoking gun. But you're totally right. I mean, I think the bigger issue is like, how do they ensure that your particular novel or your particular painting or your particular article doesn't get into the training data? Because this is like an earth mover, right? It's just the scale at which these things operate is so vast that the fine level of control, I mean, I'm not technical, so maybe there are ways to do this, but the fine level of control that you would need to exclude one guy or one woman over here or over there, I mean, I think it's a practical problem.
And there's a ton of nuance in this also where, anything can be partially AI created, right? And so if the end game is to watermark anything that's possibly AI, what happens with something that's accelerated by AI but is generated by humans? So, for example, Adobe has their Firefly product. You can grab an image, you can expand the canvas of that,
right,
and it'll fill it in. A person's doing that, but the AI is enhancing that. Is that an AI watermarked image at that point, or is that human generated? And how do you manage that? So,
well, as we've said, you can't copyright an AI generative AI content, and I think this still needs to be refined. If it's authored by an AI, it can't be copyrighted. So it's basically public domain. Now, when you get into some hybrid creation, I think that's more problematic because then you have to sort of say, to what degree does human intervention or human editorial oversight turn it into a human created product?
I wonder too, I mean, so we've talked a little bit before about, I don't know what we call it, the great dumbing down or the great watering down of content that comes from, the snake eating its own tail, right? So we know already that generative AI produces stuff that sort of has a tonality and a, punch or punchiness that's kind of lower. It generally reads as less creative and less interesting. It sort of has a slight monotone. And, as LLMs are built that are actually consuming a lot of that stuff that's been created, it seems like it drags the average down, even further. So now if we add to that the humans that are creating the really interesting stuff are also saying, don't ingest my really interesting creative stuff, we're actually losing some of the grist for the mill that might plausibly draw the LLMs in the opposite direction. So that the whole world seems like it might turn to gray here pretty soon.
There was a study by British researchers, University College London and University of Exeter, that published a study where I'm going to do the bastardized version of this, where they basically tested out human creativity without AI, then with AI, and drew some conclusions. So there were human evaluators who assessed the subjects before and then after, and there was a control group where there was no AI involved, and then two scenarios with AI. So basically, people were asked to write short stories or stories of some kind, and AI was available to help some of the people. And what they found, to give you the very superficial version, is that for people that scored lower on these creativity indices that they had created, AI was very helpful to them. So it brought up their skill level. And for people who were very high scoring, who were highly creative people, it didn't help them. It didn't add anything to what they were doing. That's an interesting finding. And then there was a sort of a third gestalt kind of thing where in total, the work that was AI assisted tended to be similar and was sort of more bland or less interesting, less novel than the highly creative individuals. So there's this sort of critique that you're alluding to, which is like AI makes everything sort of regression to the mean or oatmealification of everything. It turns to gray or something very formulaic and standardized. And for people that need the help, it's great. It's a great tool, but for everybody else, maybe not so great. And the culture as a whole.
Yeah, a lot of hand wringing going on there around sort of dragging down the averages. I mean, in a world where, 50 Shades of Gray, hit before generative AI, like what, and that was sort of viewed, I think, correctly as like a great dragging down of quality of content, or at least it might be perceived as that. Like if you're in the business of literature, literary criticism, or whatever, like so to what degree does the content that gets created by AI, to what degree is that more like sort of high fructose corn syrup than it is like a nutritious meal, right? So are we just sort of like feeding this insatiable need for sugar as opposed to, generating kind of healthier meals for our brains? I don't know.
It's a very real issue. I mean, if you look at from an education standpoint, and this is what universities and other schools are really struggling with right now, is if you're getting quick answers to a summary of a book, for example, that you didn't read, you didn't go through the discipline of actually reading the book or learning the material, and you got the surface level kind of answer that you can answer the question in the moment. Are you really developing the skill set to learn? And if you extrapolate that out, what the risk is that you end up with this society that lives on this high fructose corn syrup kind of education process that makes it very confusing and very difficult as to where that's going to go. Are you going to end up with a society full of dummies down the road?
Well, you could argue, Andy, that we have already arrived, that's already the case. I mean, yeah.
Well,
I mean,
now, just wait.
I mean, that popular culture, movies, TV, fiction, is arguably in that place right now. I mean, there's a way in which it's kind of a best of times, worst of times scenario right now, where there's a lot of really great stuff that exists, but the vast majority is dreck, and this is what the internet unleashed, right? The democratization of all these different fields, where it was easier to create content, it was easier to distribute content. The gatekeepers, the critics, the New Yorker book critics, and so on and so forth, lost power. The film critics, the restaurant critics, and so we've been in this sort of process for a very, very long time, 25 years, and this is kind of an acceleration, perhaps, of that. And the danger is that everything, it's really all about money in most of these cases, right? So you're going to have another Avengers movie or another kind of book that's going to be commercially oriented, because that's really what people are interested in. There are a small group of people who are really interested in creative excellence and creating art, but most people are interested in making as much money as possible, and they will do that in whatever way they can and through whatever mechanism makes that more likely. If you guys didn't see American Fiction, we probably already had this conversation. You should see it. It's a great movie. It sort of takes this on with a kind of there's a racial ethnic dimension to it, but this is part of what this is about, right? Kind of cynical selling out for financial gain as opposed to creating art.
I haven't seen it, but it's right up at the top of the list.
It's a terrific movie. It's a terrific movie. Yeah.
Well, this is a really big problem, and it sort of feels a little bit on the surface like an elitist argument, right? Like we can't let the peasants through the gate. Like there's all this, this terrible content. I mean, I think to your point, this is the continuation of a theme that's been going for quite a long time. Like, probably, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I can imagine some artists saying it is suddenly too easy to do these things, and therefore everybody's doing it, and that's disrupting the important stuff that's happening. And what's interesting about that is that it's kind of, on the one hand, an elitist position to take. On the other hand, as the cost of putting direct out into the world goes to zero, and the revenue that somebody could generate from putting direct out into the world is even slightly greater than zero, guess what happens? Like the floodgates open and the direct flows. And, this is, we saw this in little ways a lot over the last 15 years. One of my favorite examples was the Amazon non-books. I don't know if you guys heard about these, but there were these sort of just gibberish Amazon self-published books that got created, and it was all kind of random nonsense. And somehow there was a few bucks to be made in there. And so people just kind of kept self-publishing all this stuff. That was before there was generative AI. So guess what happens next?
100%.
Well, at least generative AI makes it sort of pseudo-coherent, right? Or semi-coherent.
That's true. That's true. So maybe it's a level up.
Yeah.
It's better Drek. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, let's move to our last topic here. OpenAI is talking about building a search product again, and this keeps coming up in the news. There seems to be a real desire, both on the consumer side and just this inertia that's happening in the space, to redefine what search is on the internet. Perplexity currently seems to be doing the best job of search combined with AI right now, arguably. OpenAI releasing a search product will definitely turn up the heat on Google, and Microsoft being lead investor in that seems they're highly motivated to disrupt Google in this case.
Let me clarify one thing. The OpenAI itself has not said we're building a search product. I mean, Sam Altman in a podcast said it would be great to reimagine search. So he talked sort of expansively about what search might look like in an AI context, but he did not say we are building a search product. The reason this has surfaced again, sort of in the next wave of rumors, is because the CEO of The Atlantic said, which has a partnership with OpenAI, they're going to build a search product, and we want to be part of that content when they do, or something like that. That was part of a Verge podcast interview. You're right that there's this sort of expectation that they're going to build something, and it has a certain kind of logic to it. And there are a bunch of reasons why it might make sense for them. But so far, Google has not been disrupted by ChatGPT, notwithstanding all of our conversation, or Perplexity. The traffic levels that Google is seeing are as high or higher as they've been. And so I have demand for an alternative to Google. I would like to see an alternative to Google. I would like to see real competition, because I think that would be healthy for the market. But it's not clear that they're going to build one for sure. And if they build it, will people show up in numbers that are meaningful? That's also not clear. I think people want it because I think there's a lot of dissatisfaction with Google. There's a lot of frustration, dissatisfaction, certainly within the industry. But I think more broadly, there's evidence of that, and people want to see it. So we'll see.
Yeah, it seems with Apple's introduction of AI, however they're going to do it, it's very likely that they're going to lead with a restructuring of Siri and how Siri works. And if you imagine, if that's the case, that people will then start using Siri in a little bit of a different way as their search entry point. And then maybe the search results, the user gets taken to Safari at that point. Apple gets paid by Google each time people run searches. So subsequent searches that happen start with Siri, but then get refined on Safari. I could see how Apple wants to keep that a closed ecosystem and really drive that search usage at that point.
Yeah, that's right. That strikes me as the more obvious sort of way to disrupt search, because it's an entrenched product that everybody's walking around with in their pocket already. One small change in behavior, which is I talk to Siri and ask a question. Probably, by the way, it might actually happen accidentally the first time, right? I might just say, hey, who was in that film with John Travolta 15 years ago? And, sort of stumble into an intelligent conversation. But that does strike me as an easier way to disrupt Google from that sort of entrenched, position where people are already using something, as opposed to ChatGPT. As you were saying, Greg, this idea that we have, could they get enough traffic quickly enough to be disruptive in any meaningful way? That seems like a hard one.
Well, there's also the business model, right? Because Altman has said he hates ads. And I mean, obviously, ads are what power Google search and Perplexity now to a degree. Are people going to pay some, is this going to be part of the ChatGPT premium subscription, or are people going to pay a supplemental fee for this? Amazon Alexa is flirting with charging a monthly subscription for an AI enhanced version of Alexa. And I'm quite skeptical that people would pay for that. And so I think given Google and its entrenched nature, if you show up with a pretty interesting search alternative product, but you say, hey, everybody, you got to pay $20 for that a month, or you got to pay $10 a month for that, and Google is available, I think that's going to be a pretty hard sell for most people. And so the number of people that are willing to pay that aren't already paying or pay some supplement above the $20, I think that's a real challenge for OpenAI if they do wind up developing search.
Totally agree. All right, well, let's wrap it up here. This has been a great conversation. Really interesting things going on this week and in the AI world. Let's wrap up with just any kind of closing ideas that you guys might have. I'll lead off with one which I thought was really interesting. This week, I saw this press conference with Elon Musk talking about this concept of if you lose a limb, you can use the Optimus robot, a limb from the Optimus robot, connect it to your body, implant the Neuralink chip, and have the Neuralink control the limb just as if it was part of your body. Certainly, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but 10, 15 years down the road, what a moonshot idea that is.
You can use that limb to steer your Tesla to your SpaceX launch. That's powered by solar from whatever solar company.
It was a Tesla accident in the first place that caused you to lose the limb.
Yeah, right. It's full circle.
Because you were asking Grok what to do in a moment while you're driving.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, he's got it all covered. It's amazing.
I think any medical advances like that are valuable for people to restore their functioning. I think, anytime you put something electronic in somebody or anything electronic, it can be hacked, right? It could be attacked or it can malfunction. And so that would be a concern there. But I think it's pretty interesting. We said before we started recording, this is kind of like the $6 Million Man, which was a childhood favorite TV show of mine. Although you can't buy anything for $6 million now, but it would be the $6 trillion man these days, or the $6 billion man. But I think it's very interesting. I think consistent with the health conversation, there's a lot of potential there. It's quite interesting. I have nothing to add to what I've already said, so I will let John finish the.
Well,
lead us
the thing
out.
I'll leave with is I'm now a little bit obsessed with the graying of or the watering down of creativity, and so I sort of have this sort of imagining that world, the dystopian world of that Apple 1984 ad where everybody is kind of zoned out, and there's this sort of small band of creatives that's like created this little sanctuary where they do their creative stuff and they're trying to like add color back into the world. I wouldn't actually be surprised if we don't end up with, some slightly less dramatic version of that in the coming years.
Human interaction, human creativity there'll be a premium placed on that, it'll be sort of artisanal, it's like,
right.
If you want, if you're an airline loyalty member and you're at the top level, you get humans answering the phone after one ring, right? They pick up and they talk to you, and they're local people typically. If you're lower down on the hierarchy, you get machines. You get automated, or you get somebody offshore doing a chat, which may be fine. But this is an illustration of how it'll be harder to get to humans, or harder to get to human creative output, and you'll have to pay more, or it'll be more rarefied, I think.
Yeah.
I do think on the artisanal note that I'm going to go ahead and make a wild prediction here, but I think that the artisanal aspect, this is going to be creating these automations or using the technology to create new art, new automations that make your life easier, that other people will be able to share as templates to say, here's automation that I created. Go ahead, apply it to your life and do these kinds of things. And a rudimentary version of that is like, if this, then that, kind of technology that's
right.
existed. I think there's going to be a lot of this, kind of next gen level where you can tell the AI, tell your phone, tell Siri or whatever it is that you want, you want something to happen, and automatically it will create the steps for those things to happen, and it'll ask you to review it, and then you say yes, and that becomes a template, like a little mini app or GPT that can be shared with other people so that you can plug these into your own life and your own workflow.
Undoubtedly. I'm reminded, as a kind of final note, of the utopian sort of, house of the future, home of the future in the in the 50s and very, very early 60s. We've all seen these, like, it's like, the music in the background and everybody's smiling and it's an all white family, and the mom, who of course is a homemaker, doesn't do anything, no cleaning, no cooking, it's all automated. And the smiling children come home and eat the automated meal, and the husband comes home, from his whatever Jetson's job, and it's all just this perfect, and leisure time will increase by 100-fold, right? That's always been the promise of technology, that'll make our lives simpler and better. And the reality is a much more mixed outcome, right? Certain things are great, other things are not so great. And that's, I think, the same with this, but we'll see.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for the conversation. We'll pick it up next week with more interesting things going on in the world of AI. Thank you.